So I think we're just coming up to 4 o'clock, and I wanted to introduce my guest this afternoon, who is Shelagh Robinson. Hello, Shelagh. Welcome to the programme.
Hello, Jeremy.
It's lovely to have you. And I think you're at your home in Cheshire,
That's right.
and you've just got your dog back from the kennel. So if a dog suddenly appears on camera, that's intended rather than unintended.
Yes, it's friends reunited.
Shelagh, as you know, I do this programme every week, sponsored by Care Vision's Healthy Aging, and it's designed to help people understand better about aging well and the opportunities to live well. And it's got a particular focus on dementia. And every month I want to talk to somebody who has lived experience of dementia. And you probably fit that bill particularly well because, of course, your mother sadly had vascular dementia and passed away fairly recently, aged, I think, 94. Yes. Your husband has dementia and you've got it yourself. But I think the important thing to remember is that it's not the person with dementia I want to talk to, it's the person who happens to have dementia. And I don't think you should be defined by dementia. It obviously has an impact on your life, as it would on anyone with any disease, but it doesn't define you. It's not what makes the DNA of Shelagh Robinson. So I'd rather
I think it's the least important thing about me.
So we'll probably come back to it inevitably at some point in the next half an hour. But let me start by some of the things that I find fascinating about you. And the first thing is your love of poetry and Shakespeare. Just tell me, where does that come from? Is that something from your school days or something that's grown up over the years?
No, I was blessed by absolutely brilliant teachers who loved Shakespeare and who taught it really well. And my first husband, I met him when he was producing Twelfth Night and gave me a part in it at our local Catholic Youth Club. So Shakespeare's been an important part of my life for a long time.
And do you have a favourite play, or are you a lover of them all?
Well, I have lots of favourite plays, but at the moment, for some reason, I'm totally obsessed with Macbeth. I'm reading it, searching for different productions of it, and reading about it. So it's the week of the Macbeth at the moment.
Okay, that sounds very good. Quite sombre actually, but very impactful.
Yes, I'm even reading a detective story about it, which is about a production of it. So.
That's a novel take. Yes. Have you watched any of the National Theatre productions? Because one of the advantages of coronavirus lockdown is that they've been putting some of the really amazing National Theatre Shakespeare productions and the Royal Shakespeare Company productions on screen. Have you had a chance to watch any of those?
Yes, I saw some of those. I saw Christopher Eccleston as Macbeth, and that was absolutely. I stayed up very late watching it, and it was spellbinding. It's the only time Macbeth has ever reduced me to tears.
Yes.
Because usually it's all sort of somber and anger, but the Macbeth talking about the death of his children, when he said all my chickens and their dam, he said all very slowly 4 times, as if he were bringing the children back into his mind, and it was absolutely heartbreaking.
And it is really remarkable when you see a good production of Shakespeare like that. You realise how much you can do with a script that changes the emphasis enormously. So the director and the actor can actually embellish and develop and emphasise in a way that is very different from somebody else who takes the same script, the same play, but produces quite a different feel to it. And I think that's always fascinating. So no two productions are the same.
Now, I've been very privileged because, as you know, I'm a Quaker and quite often go to the Quaker Study Centre, Woodbrook in Birmingham, where I've been privileged to attend Shakespeare classes run by Jane Lapater, the actress, and then go to Stratford with her and then discuss the play when we come back. And that's, again, deepened my love of Shakespeare to such an extent. It has been such a privilege to both to get to know Jane and to do that work with her.
And have you ever looked in depth at King Lear? Because thinking about dementia, as inevitably we do in this programme, many people say King Lear himself had dementia, and that was, dementia wasn't invented when Dr. Alzheimer identified it in the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. Do you feel that's true, that if you read King Lear...
I think it is. I think the kind of conflict with his daughters is very typical of what happens in the early stages of dementia, those breakdowns in relationships because the person with dementia is sees things differently from a different perspective.
Right. No, that's interesting. Now, the other great love of your life that I know from talking to you is cooking and food. And I read recently something you wrote which said you've had some amazing meals in your life, including, I think you said, a supper at Buckingham Palace, a meal at a high pass overlooking Mount Everest, and a boat in India. Just tell me about any of those, because they do sound quite exotic.
Well, the Buckingham Palace thing was an Alzheimer's Society thing. If you remember, some of us went to Buckingham Palace as part of the Young Royals Mental Health Initiative. Yes. So we had a very elegant supper with lots of champagne. I've never seen such big bottles of champagne.
Yeah, they were quite amazing, yes.
Yes, of course, yes, you were there. So that was quite a day.
And what about the overlooking Everest? What got you there?
We'd been on holiday in India and we went up to Nepal and stayed at the hotel almost in the foothills of Everest, as near as you could go, really. And there was it's a little village, but there was a rooftop restaurant where we often say it was the best meal we'd ever had, and it cost the equivalent of about £3 for the two of us.
Yes, that's always remarkable. And I suppose inevitably coming back to the reality of today and coronavirus, one of the things you said early on in coronavirus is, I think you described it as bewildering and felt it was quite isolating. But then you said alongside these amazing meals like Mount Everest and Buckingham Palace, you had a picnic, I think, with your daughter last month, which was the first time you'd seen your family for many, many weeks. And that was a very special meal in itself.
Yes, she came along with sort of, she'd bought chairs, garden chairs, and we sat out in the garden here at Lee Court. I live in a supported living environment, and we sat socially distanced and had a picnic, which she brought, which was lovely. And
you've been able to see your grandchildren, have you now?
I've seen the older ones. I haven't seen the little ones for far too long, but right. we talk on Zoom and we talk on the phone.
And so you feel a bit less isolated than you otherwise would feel?
Yes.
Oh, that's good. Do you think it's important for people as they get older I gave the example of Terry Waite taking on a new thing like playing the ukulele. Do you feel that that's something people should do more of, to try new things, or because we tend to think the older you get, the more you have to stick to things you've always done? Well, I wondered if you had a view on, and whether you yourself have taken on some new activities in recent years.
I think it's about being passionate about whatever you're doing. I'm not sure that I've taken on. Yeah, I suppose I write more. I write creatively more than I have done in the past. I'm writing a lot of poetry, some of which is being published, including poems about dementia. So I'm doing more of that than I did, but that's been in and out of my life for a long time. I'm just concentrating on it more now.
So when are your poems going to be published?
Well, they've been published in various journals and things. They're around.
Okay, now I must have a look. I've missed out so far, so I will have a look, and I encourage everyone else who's listening to have a look.
I'll send you I'll send you the dementia poems.
That would be good, because I remember you said again. You said something. You quoted, I think it was Frederick Buechner, who said, "You should find your work at the place where your heart's joy and the world's deep hunger meets."
Yes. And
I thought that was a very profound statement. That if you're, and I think you've always been driven by a sense of purpose. You've been a counsellor, you ran a women's refuge, you're an amazing campaigner, but it's clearly things that you're doing that make a difference for the world, but something that you feel emotionally you get joy out of, or you get satisfaction out of, and that coming together of personal fulfillment, if you like, and social purpose does seem to be a driving characteristic of what you've done.
Yes, and I think that if it's just duty, then there's something cold about it, that the joy has to be there.
Yes. No, I think it brings people alive. And when you develop dementia, a lot of people feel quite despairing and feel very negative about it. There are some real difficulties involved, and I think you yourself had a fairly traumatic journey of getting a diagnosis in the first place. Can you just tell me a little bit about the experience you had of getting your diagnosis?
Yes, my initial consultation was fine. I had someone who really, a GP who really listened to me and got me through to a psychiatrist. But it was the actual delivery of the diagnosis, which still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, because I went by myself to see see the psychiatrist who was going to give me the results of the scans and everything. And I think I sort of hoped he was going to say it was stress. I think we always do, even though deep down I knew. And I went in to see him. I'd driven there by myself, and he didn't even look up from his computer to meet my eyes. He said, "Oh, yes, Mrs. Robinson, we've had the results of your scans, and you've got Alzheimer's disease, and I'm writing to your doctor. We have some medication which will help, and I'll see you in 3 months." And that was it.
And that's all he said?
That was it. He never made eye contact with me. He never looked up from the computer. And I went out and sat in the car, and my world had ended in a way, because you think that at the beginning.
Yes, and I've heard other people who have a similar experience where it's very difficult. There was I don't know if you remember Jennifer Butte, a doctor in Bristol, who I think took her 6 years to get a diagnosis, and she was herself a GP, and she had quite early dementia that developed in her 60s, and they repeatedly said, "Oh no, you couldn't possibly have dementia. There's no way you could have it," and she kept getting fobbed off until eventually she had a scan, and the specialist said, "Oh, you've got quite developed Alzheimer's," and she felt like saying, "Well, I told you so," but nobody took me seriously. And there is something about the fact that you're the best person to diagnose for yourself, even though, as you say, you may want to interpret it as something else, because nobody likes to know that they've got a long-term health condition. So, but deep down, you felt you knew something was wrong even before you got the diagnosis.
Yes, but it was a grim way of actually getting it.
Yes, yeah. And has it improved since? Do you get better support now, or is it still a bit hit and miss in terms of the support you get from the NHS?
I really don't get any support from the NHS. I mean, I have an excellent GP, but she will be inclined to say you know more about dementia than I do. And when I have my annual drugs review, the last time I had it, the nurse the senior nurse who was doing it said, "Dementia, okay, tick," and that was it.
And that's all. That's all you got.
That's all I got. Yes.
Right.
But the support that I've had, particularly under your watch, has been from the Alzheimer's Society, who've given me information, friendship, purpose, all kinds of things. So without the Alzheimer's Society, I really don't know where I'd be.
Well, that's good news. But of course, it's a two-way process. And the thing that makes the Alzheimer's Society work is participation from people like yourself. And I remember one of the things you did quite early on, I think, is present a petition to Parliament and talk about the impact of dementia in Parliament. Just, is campaigning been an important part of your living with a disease? Because it does feel as though sometimes it's a way of doing something positive, even though you've got a lot of negatives in a sense by having a disease that you never asked for in the first place.
I think I come from a family of campaigners. We've always been there campaigning about something. One of my strongest memories is waking as a little girl. I lived with my grandmother, I was brought up by my grandmother, and she came upstairs, and there was a real Irish hoolie going on downstairs, and she carried me downstairs and said, "I want you to remember forever that tonight the people have elected their first government." It was the first post-war, the Attlee government, but it mattered enough to her. She was very political, the whole family were, and so I was brought up like that, and my children are the same, really. There.
Right. And tell me a little bit about the campaigning you've done with the Alzheimer's Society over the last few years. What stands out?
Well, I think that the campaign for better support at diagnosis was really important. We thought that I can't remember who it was that was supporting me with it, and we thought we'd aim to get 5,000, possibly 3,000, then maybe 5,000 signatures, and we ended up with about 75,000, didn't we? It was just amazing the number of signatures to that petition for better support that we took to Downing Street. So that was the first thing I did, and the number of people who responded to that made me think, I'm not in isolation with this. A lot of people have had the experience of really poor support. So that was that was a very important thing.
And as I recall, it wasn't a campaign or a petition that was out for very long. It very quickly built up. It
was amazing how quickly it grew.
Yeah, I think it's more common than not that people are frustrated by the diagnosis process and feeling that they have to. There's something quite off-putting when you're used to going to your GP to suddenly go to a building with meeting somebody you don't know, which may well be described as a mental health trust. So you're put on you're on edge, you're nervous, and you're in an unsettling environment, and then to have the experience you talked about where you don't even get eye contact with the person you're meeting does seem somewhat, unhelpful and not really what we want to see in terms of best practice.
No, and comparisons are odious, but if you compare it with the support that people who get a diagnosis of cancer have, I mean, I've been with a friend to get a diagnosis, and there's been a nurse there to talk it through lots of times, to ask all the questions. That just doesn't happen with dementia.
No, you're very much on your own. But come back to what I was saying earlier about the non-drug therapies, because one of the differences, of course, with dementia is there is no drug treatment. I mean, there's some drugs like Aricept that reduce the symptoms, but that's about all they do, and they don't work for everybody. So the non-drug support, things like music and reminiscence and quizzes and brain activity, all seem to be quite important. Do you get involved in any of those kind of activities?
No, because I do. I think my non-drug therapy, well, yes, music, but it's my own music rather than singing for the brain. I don't do that. Right. But music, I've always loved music. Again, I'm a real culture vulture because I love Mozart opera, so that can be to me better than any kind of pill. Yes. I can just sort of switch on the Figaro, and I'm either happy or in tears at the Countess singing about her unloved state.
That's lovely. And do you think more should be done to make music available to people? Because often it can be something that somebody can discover. They can discover a new love when they're older, or when they've got dementia. And I remember, in a slightly parallel example, going to visit a group in Southampton where there was somebody who was become quite an accomplished watercolorist, and they'd never done painting before in their life. But when they stopped work and they started having dementia and they went to this art class, they suddenly discovered they had quite a talent for watercolor. And I'm sure there must be people who discovering music is something new that they've never really done in life, but they can find, even as they get older, something that they've never thought about, never joined in before.
Yes, and music gets through when other things don't. I'm sure I've told you the story of my sister and I sitting with my mother just before she died, and she was in a ward in the hospital, and the Blue Danube came over on the ward music, and she started to sway in perfect time with the music. And I said to her, "Look at you dancing with your daughters." And she picked up first my hand and then Gina's and kissed it. And for a minute, our dancing queen was there.
Oh, it's lovely.
And the music had brought her back.
I think that's quite often the case, that the part of the brain that lets you connect through music, it seems to last longer and be more protected than other parts of your brain. And I know Playlist for Life as a charity that I've been involved with, that lets people produce their customized sort of playlist of music they love to be played and continually be able to listen to it, can make an enormous difference.
Yes, the sister of a friend of mine had dementia, and she was in hospital, and you could see she had a sort of music in her room on a kind of spool. I can't think of the word for it, and you could see the things she liked best just by her reaction. And she was very far into the dementia, but when something in that playlist, as it were, that she particularly loved was there, you could see the difference, although she was very deeply into her dementia.
And it is something that in the Care Visions dementia videos I talked about earlier, more often than not, there's a section with music where people can listen to or join singing something that brings back memories and restores their sense of purpose that otherwise can sometimes get lost. Can I go back to my guest? I don't know if you saw the conversation I had with Terry Waite a couple of weeks ago, but what was interesting about Terry Waite is he described himself as a Quanglican, which was a combination of a Quaker and an Anglican, because he'd been brought up an Anglican, but he'd become a Quaker. And now you're a sort of similar mix of religions, if you like. Just tell me a little bit about how you came to be a Quaker, because I think you had quite a strict Catholic upbringing, didn't you?
Yes, I had a very strict Catholic upbringing. And I used to do the talking newspaper for the blind, which we read at the Quaker Meeting House. So I was quite interested in the sort of notice board and the things that were going on there. And one day, almost on a whim, I decided to go to a Quaker meeting one Sunday, literally on a whim. And it was kind of, oh, this is what it's about, really.
Yeah.
It was like love at first sight. I knew that was where I meant to be. But strangely enough, rather like Terry Waite, because I'm not near a Quaker meeting anymore, and getting there is very difficult because I don't drive and Paul can no longer drive. The local Anglican church and the vicar who does a service here at Lee Court for residents has become very special to me, and I've been there to talk to them about dementia, and they've been very responsive to that, and done a lot of, they've become dementia friends, and so I have that link in with the church, and that is very much my congregation now.
Mm-hmm. So what was, when you went to, you sort of, as it were, felt at home in a Quaker meeting, what was it, do you think, that is different? What is it for somebody who's never been to a Quaker meeting? What makes it special in your experience?
It's the quality of the silence, I think. Yeah, this is something I think you don't know about me, Jeremy. Oh, no, I don't think you do. When I was a girl, I tested my vocation to be a Carmelite nun.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
But they wouldn't have me. They sent me away very quickly. I went to stay with them for the summer. And I've always been very called towards silence as a way of worshipping. So I think that's why the Quaker meeting was so important.
And silence, of course, some people feel is frightening, but it doesn't need to be. It actually can be quite supportive and quite engaging, can't it?
Yes, I've never had any, as I say, I wanted to go into a silent order, so I've never had any problem with silence at all.
Well, I'm glad you didn't become a Carmelite nun, because I might never have met you as a result. So
I did think it was funny that they wouldn't have me. I was sure that they'd really welcome me, but it wasn't like that at all.
Did they say why? Did they give you a reason why you weren't suited in that?
In fact, it was interesting. A very wise and prescient Reverend Mother said, "You need to go away and have some babies," which is exactly what I did.
Right, and you've now got a family to prove it.
Yes, I've 3 children and 11 grandchildren.
We're going to come on to a couple of some questions. I've just been buzzed, so we'll come on to some questions. But one thing I read that you wrote a while back, and I wanted you just to expand on, is around your experience with dementia and your faith. And what you said was, I never had the sense that God was punishing me, but that God was beside me through all of this. Can you just say a little bit more about what you mean by that?
I think that, as you know, my faith is important to me and hard to talk about, but it's always felt, it was as if I were living the 23rd Psalm right from the beginning. There was never any sense of punishment or abandonment. God was with me in this right from the beginning.
And I think that for many people, that's quite an important message, because it is very easy to feel somehow that you've done something wrong, that somehow having dementia or having any illness is somehow a punishment or a retribution. But of course it's not. It's just a medical fact of life. In the same way
I can remember being in Northern Ireland and being absolutely heartbroken by meeting a man whose wife had dementia, and who actually said to me in one of our one-to-one conversations, "It's my fault because I've been a sinner and I'm being punished."
Yes, yes.
And I just wanted to put my arms around him and hold him and say, God isn't like that. But that was the way he saw it.
And it is a way of connecting with people through their faith to help them come to terms with the world that they're now living in. I know that the Hindu temple in West London I went to at the beginning of this year, and they've done an enormous program of becoming dementia friends and making it supportive and making people feel that even when they've got dementia, they can still come and participate in worship, and they shouldn't feel afraid, they shouldn't feel ashamed of any of their behaviour that they might have, that the community will be supportive. And that is a really important part of being still belonging where you belong, really.
If you know David Primrose, of course, he and I used to go to a faiths in dementia meetings, which was very much an interfaith thing, and that was very interesting, because that was very real, that coming together for some people anyway was what mattered, and there was a tremendous variety in the different ways faith responded to dementia. For some people it's still some faiths it's still a stigma, but when people were supported by their faith, it made such a difference.
Yes. I'm going to ask you one more question, quite a personal question, and then we'll come on to a couple of questions that I can see have come in. But I'm just interested, and I hope you don't mind me asking, about the different experience of dementia for yourself, Paul, your husband, and your mother. because I think people tend to sort of think dementia is one uniform experience, and that it can be sort of boxed in. But I suspect I'm going to ask you how different it was for the three of you, and your reflections on that.
It has been a very different experience. You know, for Paul, it's been quite a very depressing experience. For Mum, she kind of ignored it, really.
Right.
Because that was just the way she was. You know, she just went on, got on with her life, and occasionally would say, "Oh, I can't remember. You know, I can't remember." But what mattered to her were the things that always mattered. And for me,
Yes.
it was a campaigning, getting involved thing.
And just on the campaigning, one of the things you've been involved in is the Three Nations Dementia Working Group. Just tell us, for people who don't know what that is, and particularly people who are watching who may have somebody in their family, or they themselves may have dementia, just can you explain what the Three Nations Working Group is, and do a little bit of an advert for it, really?
Yes, the Dementia Working Group is a group of people who all have dementia, who want their voices to be heard, who want to be the authentic voice of people with dementia, and who hope to be in some ways the go-to group for anyone who wants to explore that voice more, so that they're available to talk. They're great campaigners. You know, they're doing always involved in a campaign about care, very involved in a campaign about care, and they need a lot of people to join, because if we are campaigning to be able to say we may be the steering group, but we're representing X thousand people, then the voice is much louder. So the more people who join the Three Nations Working Group, the better. Okay,
and is there anything particular you're campaigning on at the moment that you'd want to highlight?
Well, it is about care and about improving care and more parity with cancer care than there is at the moment.
Yes, and it is bizarre, isn't it, that cancer, which has a lot of treatment, you get better support generally. Dementia, where there's very little treatment, you also get ignored quite a lot, and people should be able to get the same support, whatever the disease is that life throws at them. Yeah. Okay, I've got a couple of questions. I'm going to have to lean forward because I can't quite read them on the screen, but it says, so the first one is, hello, is from somebody called Philip. Very interesting to hear about your life, Sheila. It's clear that getting dementia can be quite a scary experience. Have you got any tips on how to talk to younger people, particularly children or grandchildren? How do you cover off dementia with young people that you're in contact with?
Well, that hasn't been a problem for me at all. They've just accepted it. They've accepted me, and have been so supportive. It's unbelievable. I'm probably going to embarrass him terribly, but when my grandson, who's now a big bold barrister, was about 15, we were going out to I think we were going to the theatre, and you know what 15-year-old boys, they won't say anything personal, but he stopped and said, "Nanny, have you got your nappy back?" And I loved him so much on that day that he would get over his 15-year-old embarrassment to make sure that I was comfortable. And they've just accepted the fact that I have dementia. The little ones, will say, "Nanny forgets," or, "Oh, Nanny," my granddaughter, as called it fizzy hammers, because she couldn't
fizzy hammers.
Fizzy hammers, yeah. So my blog is called fizzyhammers.com. Because she couldn't say Alzheimer's, and they've just accepted that, I have an illness, and
But it sounds like the important thing you're saying is don't hide it away, don't try and pretend.
No, absolutely not. No, but they're my biggest supporters.
Yeah. Right. One quick question before we run out of time. So this is from somebody called Claire. Great to hear about your experience. What do you think a place of worship can do to make it feel inclusive for people with dementia? I'm just summarising the question.
Well, I think I'm going to be a bit controversial by saying this, but I think be as you always were. I'm not a great fan of special services for dementia because they're different. I think the important thing is that things are the same, and perhaps it's more important, perhaps the best thing they can do is have someone there to help if it becomes difficult, to be a supporter rather than to put on special worship for people with dementia. Just having somebody who can be there with a person with dementia is much more important, I think.
Yes, that's really good advice. And something I learned a while back was a bit like lots of churches and faith groups have Sunday school, they take the children out during part of the service. You can actually have the same flexibility where those people with dementia who want to can leave for part of the service and go and have a cup of tea or a drink and not feel they've got to sit in. So it's optional, but you've got the flexibility of either being in the service or not. And I think it's giving people those options is really important.
Yes. I mean, I had a strange thing at my Quaker meeting, that if I went into a very deep worship, I would come back out of it very confused and looking for people, because I'd been so far away. I would come out very confused and looking for people who were dead, but the meeting would just say, oh, it's just fizzy hammers, because they call it fizzy hammers as well. No, it's okay.
But I think that will stay with me. I've never heard that before. Fizzy hammers is a wonderful description and very
much better than Alzheimer's, isn't it?
Yeah, much better, absolutely. Sheila, we better stop there because we're out of time, but it's been a fantastic chance to catch up with you, and I always find it stimulating talking to you, and now we know thousands of other people will have that benefit as well, because every week we seem to get thousands of people either coming live to watch this or to watch it recorded over the few days ahead. So thank you so much, Sheila, for joining me. It's been great to have you. Next week, I'm pleased to say that Jabir Butt, the Chief Executive of the Race Equality Foundation, will be here, and he's particularly been working over the years about supporting older people and people with dementia from the Black and ethnic minority communities. So that will be a really interesting contribution to the conversation next week. So that will be Jabir Butt at 4 o'clock next Tuesday afternoon. But Sheila, once again, thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed the time with your dog and your family in the weeks ahead. Good to speak to you. Bye, everybody.
Be in touch. Bye.